I want to welcome everybody to the Gold Institute for International Strategy conversation discussion with a group of some of our most distinguished fellows. We're here to talk about a topic which I entitled "From the Gulf to the Middle East," and we're here to look at the recent relationship or Abraham Accords between the U.A.E, United Arab Emirates, and Israel. There seems to be a shift happening within the Gulf region as well and in the Middle East as a whole. And I wanted to sit here and take a look, because this is a historic event. I wanted to have a conversation with our distinguished fellows to talk about this very topic. Now, what makes this conversation very, very unique is in this one conversation, we have 5 countries represented. We have with us Ehud Elam, who will speak first. He's going to represent a Gold Institute Senior Fellow, and his area of focus typically is Israel and Israel and its neighbors. So I'm going to ask Ehud to speak about what this looks like from an Israeli perspective. We have a distinguished fellow with us as well, Dirk Jan Epping. Dirk is a sitting member of European Parliament. He is officially an honorary distinguished fellow in his capacity as his capacity allows, and he's going to talk about what this looks like from a European perspective, because clearly, as we know, when it comes to Israel, Europe is not short on opinions. We have with us as well a senior fellow, Dr. Naro Zagros. Naro is based in Iraq, or in Kurdistan, the Kurdistan region of Iraq. And clearly, especially in that region, Iraq, Iran, this has a huge impact on. I mean, clearly, this is my own parenthetically speaking. I would be curious to hear what Naro thinks about the long-term vision. Maybe this is the first step towards an independent Kurdistan. We have Jeffrey Van Orden, who I'm honored to have join us as well. Jeffrey formerly represented the UK in European Parliament. But since the UK is no longer in Europe, I say that in jest, since and he is back at home riding out the COVID. Jeffrey, I must say, which is of great pride to the Institute, has the rank of a CBE, Commander of the British Empire, which is the highest rank, I am told. And that to have Jeffrey at the Institute clearly is a high honor for us as well. And wrapping it up from the American perspective, we have a Vice President of Strategic Affairs at the Gold Institute, Adam Levinger. Adam, who spent many moons at the Office of Net Assessment in the Pentagon, focused on strategy, and then went during the Trump administration, to the National Security Council as a senior strategist, has joined the Institute as well. A high honor to have all of you with us. Why don't we begin with Ehud Elam and to talk about things from the Israeli perspective. Ehud?
Thank you very much, Eli. Thank you all for coming here. It's great to be here with this international panel, courtesy of Zoom and all that. I should mention something about our former debate. I'm a US citizen. I live near Boston here in a small town, and I'm mostly concerned about the economy. People here I know lost their job, might lose their job. I have other friends that have pay cuts, so I'm concerned about that. But now I'll go back to, I will not talk about divided America. I will talk about an area that it's completely united, no problem there. The Middle East, of course, we all know that, no problem there. So the the agreement, well, actually there is no still an agreement between Israel and the U.A.E. There's only an announcement about negotiation that will start. They might able to finish it in a few weeks even, and to have some kind of agreement signed in the White House. And of course, the devil is in the details, but mostly we have to watch what will happen after the agreement. I'm pretty sure there will be an agreement, but there was also a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt since 1979, Israel and Jordan since 1994. Also, I should mention there was a kind of a similar situation with Mauritania, a state in the Arab state in northwest Africa. It renewed it had basically it recognized Israel in 1999. They had diplomatic ties and all that, and embassies and so on for 10 years. And it managed to survive the fight between Israel and the Palestinians. But then in 2009, followed the war in Gaza, Mauritania cut all relations with Israel. So I hope it will not happen with the U.A.E., but there is some similarity between two states that are far away from each other, Israel and Arab states that managed to have ties, and then it was cut off. And there are all kinds of aspects that might be interested for each one of you, because, for example, Israel and the U.A.E. are fighting together basically against Iran. It has to do a lot with Iraq. Right now, there is unrest in Iraq. A little bit less you hear about that because they are against the deep Iranian involvement in that country. It has to also affect the Kurds in northern Iraq and all that. So this has effect about that. There's negotiation was between Israel and the U.A.E. The U.S. served as a broker, but the EU was completely out of it. So they didn't inform the EU and all that. So that's also another factor. There is a similarity between Israel and the U.A.E. Both of them used to be controlled by the U.K. because the U.A.E. was created in 1971 after it was under British rule. And of course, Israel was also kind of under the British rule until 1948. And there's also aspect for the DOD, for the Pentagon, because there are now reports that following the agreement, the US will agree to sell F-35 stealth fighters, of course, to the U.A.E. Israel already got them, and it's the only state in the Middle East that has it. So there is a dilemma in Israel had to do with it. In the past, like Israel had to tolerate that Egypt and Jordan simulated F-16. Saudi Arabia has F-15. Those F-15 and F-16 are not the same quality that Israel has, but they are still pretty good fighters. And there are a Saudi F-15 in an airbase less than 60 miles away from the south of Israel. So there are, of course, Saudi Arabia, it's another part of this equation, and they have secret ties with Israel, but and they kind of, that's another thing we could talk about it if you want to. So that's kind of the overall picture here is that Israel and the U.A.E. made a very important start. It's yet to be seen what will be later on, what kind of agreement, what will be after that. The relations between Israel and Arabs are always very fragile. So it's like almost a miracle that the peace between Israel and Egypt managed to survive so long, and also with Jordan. That means that's very good. In spite of all the fight between Israel and the Palestinians, it survived. With the U.A.E., if there is an agreement, it might survive as well, but always bear in mind that Israel and the Arabs are always a permanent tension between them, and any major crisis between Israel and the Arabs, mostly the Palestinians, can turn it either way.
So it's very interesting. So I spent the past few days talking to ministers, ambassadors from the region, and over the past several years, I've been working on a project to create a sense of an Arab NATO, a NATO-esque type organization in the Middle East, in particular with regards to the Gulf countries, and several of the countries that Ehud mentioned are part of this, would be part of this. Now, what I had when working on this Arab NATO-esque type institution, we were. It has always been one of those things, I guess, where Israel would play an observer status, would always have that observer role, and that was because of the dynamics. Israel, a Jewish country. The rest of the Gulf countries tend to be more, they're Arab countries, Muslim countries, and the dynamics, especially in the Sunni region, in any of the countries, whether it's Sunni or Shia, it wouldn't lend itself to have Israel as a member state. The one thing that I took out from my conversations, and this was by some of the countries, while off the record, said it blatantly, was that they're all extremely optimistic about this. They do see opportunity here, and none of them would take Israel's role off the table. In other words, above observer status, but an actual member state in this, whatever this ultimately looks like. And some of them actually said that they see that it will happen or would encourage it to happen. So the dynamics, what you once saw, seem to be changing. With that, let me move on to Dirk. Dirk Jan Epping, maybe you can give us a sense as to what's happening in the European Union, in particular European Parliament, and I would be very curious to hear, in particular, what your thoughts are going to be coming from France when it comes to this.
Well, actually, Ellie, the EU and even Europe was taken by surprise when this event was announced, because it was never considered that this would be a possibility, and certainly not under the guidance of the current administration, who was always portrayed as an administration of conflict and controversy. So it came as a surprise, and it took the High Representative of Foreign Policy, Security Policy, Joseph Borrell, quite some time to make a tweet, because his tweet has to be underpinned by 27 member states. So he has to call around. And I followed his Twitter. But he was far after events when he came up with a tweet which actually said that Israel was good, he welcomed it, but now Israel had to give up all sorts of plans with regard to the West Bank and other things. And the first thing he did was to put forward conditions toward Israel. Now, what is the principal difference here is the EU regards the Middle East to the prism of the Palestinian issue, If that issue is solved, the rest will be solved by itself. In fact, many others, myself and Jeffrey as well, I think, we regard the problem in the Middle East to the prism of Iran, being the force that moves change, coalitions, and political action against Iran. So in the field of security. So two different approaches. The EU has always been very critical of Israel, but also of the current administration. It was against the relocation of the embassy to Jerusalem. It basically singles out products from the West Bank. It pushes forward the Palestinian issue in the United Nations, and has always supported strongly the nuclear deal with Iran. It regarded the nuclear deal with Iran as a diplomatic success of the EU itself. You see, at the time, the Obama administration, of course, negotiated that deal, but gave a big praise, part of the praise, of the credit, as you say, to the EU, because it had to remain a bit under the radar with regards to Washington and Congress and Senate in particular. And so it shuffled a lot of praise to the EU, and the EU thinking, we play an important role in the world. Look at us, we have achieved something, it's our deal. We have done it. Now, if we look at the various member states, there is a clear divide within Europe, as there's a divide everywhere. The most critical countries most critical of Israel are actually France. France never expected this to happen. France was very critical of it. France critical of the current administration, etc. And Sweden. Sweden is another country that knows everything best. And so these countries have always been pushing for sanctions, boycotts, etc., measures against Israel. On the other hand, Eastern Europe, there's a lot of support for the policy of the American administration, and particularly Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, etc. Actually, most of these countries have supported the relocation of the American embassy to Jerusalem. So there's a big divide. There's no wonder why Mr. Borrell has to use his phone so much to mainly call around in the EU itself to form his, to write his tweet of 3 lines. So this is basically the picture of Europe. So taken by surprise, not in touch with current events, not with the moving forces in the region, and starting from a wrong analysis and coming then later on to the wrong conclusion.
Excellent. You know, it's interesting because most of the neighbors in the Middle East were taken by surprise as well. It could very well be that that's how it actually got done, was the fact that it was taken by surprise and you didn't have 72 other countries putting their 2 cents into it.
Yes.
Just do it, and then you let everybody know. It's as the motto that my children have. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. With that, I want to move to Naro Zagros. Naro, I mean, as we've heard so much before, the key here is now Iran and what that looks like. You're in Iran's backyard. Tell us what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in Kurdistan. Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Are you hunkering down in an undisclosed location due to the fallout coming from Iran? Please fill us in.
Thank you, Eddie, and thanks for everyone, and thanks for having me. By the way, as we speak, Iraqi Prime Minister is now with President Trump right now, and local media are broadcasting this live debate and live gathering between President Trump and Iraqi Prime Minister. And this is the first meeting between the new Prime Minister of Iraq and the President of the United States. Generally, this accord, like everyone agrees and everyone said, it's a surprise for so many people. And in Iraq, we have 2 different regions. One is Arab Iraq, the other one is Kurdish Iraq, which we call it Kurdistan, and often it's the other type of Iraq. It's a different country. In theory, it's part of Iraq, but in practice, it's a different country from Iraq. So we have 2 different perspectives in 2 regions. I want to talk about the Arab region of Iraq, which starts from Baghdad all the way to the south of Iraq. Over there, we have 3 different people, and they all have different opinions about this accord. While Iraqi officials haven't said anything publicly about the accord, but so many Shia groups and paramilitary groups in south of Iraq, in Baghdad, in other places, denounced the agreement. Just after Iran denounced it, and then the Shia paramilitary groups denounced the agreement. And the type of people that we have in Iraq, one is called the Shia Iraq, which are very much connected to Iranians. The other one, we have the so-called Iraqi nationalists. The third group, we have this Iraqi intelligentsia, mainly middle class, upper middle class Iraqis who educated in Europe and in America and other places, which are a tiny minority. So for the so-called Iraqi nationalists and for the Shias who are connected to Iranians, they denounced the agreement and they are horrified by it. But for the Iraqi, middle-class Iraqis, those people who are, mainly intellectuals, mainly people who traveled around the world, they see this agreement as a step forward agreement between the Arabs and the Arab world, the Islamic world with Israel. In Kurdish part of Iraq, it's a completely different story. Generally, people here are very much pro-Israel. And so much things have been said about the similarity between the Kurds and Israelis, the way they are all singled out in the region, the way they feel lonely in the region, the way that they have no friends in the region. So there are so much similarities. But what it is generally, I think, talking to most of my colleagues at universities, and also I had 2 TV debates about this accord on local media here, and also what I see in social media and in general local media in Kurdistan, that people are positive about it, because this agreement is it's a step forward. No longer the relation between Arabs and Israelis is no longer about old questions, about Palestinian questions, about the border of 1967, about Palestinian refugees, about whether Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel or not. It's a new thing. It's a new page. It's a new era that we see in the Middle East. And I think while Iran is dividing the region, so many forces in the region are coming together against Iran. So on the one hand, Iran is dividing the region. On the other hand, other forces who are anti-Iranians are coming together to find a block to deter Iranian threats in the region. And I think generally people are positive about it, and generally Kurds are positive about it, because what we see that the discussions among the Arab leaders, in so many moderate Arab leaders and so many Arab intellectuals, that their perception about Iraqi Kurdistan is changing too. For example, the King of Jordan is receiving Kurdish president of Iraq with Kurdish flag behind them. The King of Saudi Arabia 2 years ago received Kurdistan regional president with Kurdish flag. And 2 days ago, the Saudi Arabia's ambassador to Russia talked newspapers who said that Saudi Arabia agrees that Kurdistan should be an independent country from Iraq, because the people are different, they have different culture, different language, and everything is different, and they have every right to be independent. So with all these changes that we see a positive prospect in the near future, and I think it can only lead to something very good. And Iran is bringing forces together against themselves. It's not as horrified like other places in the Middle East. Not only that, but also pleased that this accord is taking place and it's a new page in the Middle East.
So in Kurdistan, you're not only do you think that this is a good thing, but rather you're encouraged by what this potentially means in the future for Kurdistan as well.
Absolutely, because like I said, it's something new, and it's opening doors to other old questions as well, that we are passing beyond those old problems that we had with ourselves in the Middle East. Like I said, if the U.A.E. is not objecting all other questions that they had about Palestine, then if Saudi Arabia is not denouncing the agreement between the U.A.E. and Israel, these are positive signs. And I think it's good for Kurds in Iraq and in the Middle East generally, in Syria, in Turkey, and other places for the future. Right.
If it can happen for Israel, it can certainly happen for Kurdistan.
That's what I'm hoping.
Listen, if it doesn't happen for Kurdistan, then that means there's something wrong here. With that, I want to move on to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, the UK throughout history has long stood with the United States during global conflict, and in particular within the Middle East as well. So this is clearly, I mean, I'm really eager to hear what you have to say about this, because I would imagine that the UK wasn't told about this either. What say you?
Well, I don't know the answer to that particular point. Very good, by the way, to be with you all and to hear your views. Very scintillating, actually. Absolutely great. By the way, just at the start to mention, UK at the moment, government doesn't seem to have much grip here. That's the popular view. COVID hasn't been terribly well handled. Now we've got the latest thing, which is exam results and the way all that's been done.
A-level and GCSEs.
A-levels and all that, exams without exams. And so there's been a lot of criticism there. But in spite of that, the government is still ahead in the polls, just about. So that's the sort of thing. And I just make the comment, I'm listening to the comments from the United States. I'm always very wary about outsiders making comments about other people's countries. And, when we comment on the United States, we're relying on what our media tells us is going on in the United States. The view was put forward just now, oh, well, Europe, Britain seems more divided. Well, again, it's a media view. Media lives off division. But so, at the moment, we're in the silly season in August, typically the silly season, but doubly silly season at the moment because of COVID. Now, look, as far as, if I may use this term, Middle East, the greater Middle East is concerned, I mean, the fact is that Britain was the paramount external power in the Middle East for 150 years. I suppose since the Battle of the Nile in 1798, certainly since the end of the First World War with the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. And, the history of that and the handling of it is very mixed. A lot of, faulty boundaries that were drawn up. A lot of unhappiness in places, of course, created the State of Israel. At the same time, we've always maintained very close relations with the Arab states. So this has been a very interesting juggling act, if you like, to maintain our relations with both Israel and the Arab states. Certainly as far as the Gulf states are concerned, as I think Uhud mentioned, yes, they were protectorates of the United Kingdom until certainly 1971. I think the last time we intervened independently, unilaterally in the Gulf was in 1961, when we moved to protect Kuwait against the then Iraq government of Qasim. We have very close relations, not only politically, but of course with our royal families as well, with the Gulf Emirates, and also with the Saudis. Let's not forget. So we have a very intimate relationship with this region, and the British Foreign Secretary was in the Middle East, I think, yes, in early March. He visited Oman, Saudi, and also Turkey. And the reaction on the UK side to this agreement has been wholly welcoming. And as usual, it's playing both hands here. Yes, we will of course welcome it, and also doubly so because it seems to have put a halt to ideas about annexation of parts of the West Bank, which has also been welcomed. And along with our welcome, we've also made the point that, of course, we want the Israelis and the Palestine Authority to get together and start having head-to-head negotiations again. So, if you like, playing both sides there. But I will make the point, we are very good friends with just about all of the countries in the Middle East, with the exception of Iran, which is a bit difficult. But I'm talking about all the friendly countries there. I just want to focus for 1 minute, and it was really the focus of the little piece I wrote for the Gold Institute, is just draw attention to the relevance of Turkey in all this. And this will surprise some, anger others perhaps. The Turks, it's easy not to like the Turks at the moment. So many areas of dispute, so many things they seem to do which deliberately poke us in the eye. But I come back to a fundamental point that Turkey is a very important country, which we can't afford to let slip away. And therefore, in all these discussions about possible new alliances and that, let's take account of Turkey as well. Turkey is a long-standing NATO member, and has been a good NATO member. The Soviet Union tried to undermine Turkey during the Cold War days. We have to find a way of overcoming these divisions within the friendly Arab nations, if you like, and the Kurds as well, for that matter. We have to find a way of embracing all those people well disposed to the West and our liberal values and our whole approach to life. We have to find a way. And that means we have to find a way of overcoming this Gulf Cooperation Council divisions, because we can't afford to have breaks in the ranks there. We need to overcome this East Mediterranean problem. We need to get Israel and Turkey back talking together again, as they used to have a very good alliance of convenience pre-Erdogan. But for reasons we all understand, that's gone off in different directions. We need, in a way, Turkey and Israel, they also need one another. So we need to find a way of overcoming these apparent deep differences and bringing Turkey on board. So when we talk about new alliances in the Middle East, we need to make sure that Turkey is not part of that, because otherwise what we'll end up with is not, we'll end up with division in our own ranks. That's the problem. We'll end up with a split amongst the non-Iranians, and that only plays into Iranian hands, and therefore we have to take great care.
Jeffrey, do you believe that there's that there's greater opportunity for a split with Turkey as a result of Turkey, or a greater opportunity to bring Turkey around and on board this new Middle East Gulf region?
We have to show that we understand Turkey's problem, that we respect Turkey. She feels often humiliated, as if she's treated like some third world country, where everyone looks down on her, where she's excluded from the negotiating table. And then suddenly you find, oh, well, no, but the Russians take notice of us. Others start taking notice of us. So I think we have to have some humility here. We have to deal with Turkey in an appropriate way. I mean, after all, and we might have differences of view on this. I mean, certainly as far as the lead up to the first Iraq war was concerned, I mean, the Turks cautioned against destabilizing Saddam Hussein because they feared the breakup of Iraq. And of course, what's happened since then, although it's had some positive outcomes, there's been a lot of negatives as well. So, yeah, we've just got to, I think, be more respectful.
Thank you. So I figure we'll let the U.S. round this initial part of the conversation. But if you can tell us what your thoughts are, but I'm curious to hear, and I guess after you're done giving us your thoughts, I'm curious to hear, if you can give us a certain sense from our perspective within the strategy world of Washington, let's put it that way. 2 cents on what was said today so far from the different aspects, from the various different countries. That might lead to or open the doors for some good conversation here.
No, it's good to be the last one. I have to say, listening to all of you speak, I don't really know why Ellie invited me to join the Gold Institute. You're much more intelligent and thoughtful and knowledgeable than I am. So being the last one, I can actually, learn from what you said. It's sort of like getting the answers to the exam before taking it. So thank you, Ellie, for that.
You're humble. You are very modest. You're too modest.
Just a few comments. I didn't take notes, but several things arose that I find particularly interesting. And one is the surprise that this deal generated, throughout the region. One of the reasons why Mike Flynn brought me into the NSC was that it's not because I'm particularly smart, but I've spent a decade studying really from the inside how the United States has successfully crafted and executed national security strategy historically. So it's very, very hard for America to do strategy for many, many reasons. But one is leaks. Strategy by definition is about big things, and big things are big stories. So it's absolutely no surprise whatsoever that the Israelis, the U.A.E., the U.S., whomever was involved in negotiating this deal did it in absolute secrecy. There's no other way of doing it. That's one of the lessons that I've learned from how the U.S. does big things, and it doesn't surprise me that lesson applies elsewhere. I'm particularly interested in discussing more about Turkey because what I find so interesting, Jeffrey, in your comments is that the approach the U.S. has taken in the Middle East from the very beginning of the Trump administration has really been the opposite of the approach you're advocating. And what I mean by that is this. At the outset of the Trump administration, I had a sort of a front row seat because I was a senior director for strategy at the NSC. Our approach to the region was sort of based on 3 pillars. The first was a recognition that weakness is provocative, and a recognition that peace can only be had through strength. And that for that reason, we engaged the Middle East from a position of strength, and we really, put down, red lines that are very serious. For example, vis-a-vis Israel, the Trump administration believes in Israel for many reasons, and it's not just politics, it's not just policy, but it's sort of a core conviction of the president that Israel and the United States are inseparable. We are part of the sharp tip of the spear of Western civilization. And, to forsake Israel would be to forsake our own identity. And that has led not just laying the groundwork for a peace through strength that I believe the Israel-U.A.E. Accord is a natural, predictable, logical progeny of that, but also, peace through certainty, which was another, real pillar of the Trump administration from the beginning. We made absolutely no qualms, who we thought was the reasonable party and the unreasonable party in the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And it had one of the great benefits is that the American people agree with this. Poll after poll show that the American people cannot understand for the life of them why is it that Israel did not, starting in 1948. I personally think that, through a roundabout way, it's very much in Israel's advantage to have kept things so uncertain. But now that Israel pretty much has what it wants, the American people can't believe for the life of them why Israel would not just, delineate boundaries and say, this is ours, this is yours. This is not only good for clarity, it's good for peace, because the last thing, one of the most provocative things is uncertainty, particularly amongst, sort of in Muslim strategic doctrine, Islamic strategic doctrine, as I've learned it. The third, real pillar of the Trump administration's Middle East policy has been an unequivocal designation of the Islamic Republic of Iran as an enemy. And it's not that the Iranian people are, of course. I mean, there's actually great hope in the Persian civilization for both the United States, the West, and in Israel as well. But, making that absolutely clear. I believe, Ellie, that peace through strength, peace through certainty, targeting Iran unequivocally, that these have naturally led to where we are right now with the Israel-U.A.E. accords. In many respects, I think that the approach the Trump administration has taken by really taking pieces off the table, by limiting the options and making our strategic interests very clear, that this has been a relief to many in the Middle East who really, I can only imagine, the uncertainty. It's almost sort of like, here's the West injecting so much uncertainty into the Middle Eastern affairs for so many decades. It's almost a form of sort of colonial exploitation. It's disrespectful, frankly, I think. So I think that I hope people throughout the Middle East feel very respected by the Trump administration's strategy, policy objectives, and by the results. I think they should feel that way.
No, I thought this is you make some very good points, but I wanted to hear what Jeffrey.
Well, no, but Adam, come back to Turkey. So you started to talk about Turkey.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and a lot of I genuinely don't know the answer. I really don't know the answer. But my sense is that Turkey. So I studied Islam from Bernard Lewis, and so I have a very Lewisian view of Islamic warfare, Islamic strategic doctrine. So I'm just sort of quoting him, frankly. This is, you got to learn something. I'm no expert, so I'm relying on his very long coattails. My sense is that, Turkey being a great imperial, civilization with that history, that Turkey, and also, being a member of NATO and, being this sort of, Ataturkist, lynch to the West. And, it really is in a rather privileged position. And my sense particularly that Erdogan is acting like sort of a spoiled child who sort of thinks he has everything coming to him. We've been extremely generous to the Turks. What they did, I was very much involved in the in entering Iraq, the U.S. military entering Iraq, and the Turks really betrayed us. Erdogan really betrayed us. We needed them. We, expected Turkey to help us, enter Iraq from the north, and they didn't. And
that's one of the reasons I mentioned. Yeah.
But I got to tell you, Jeffrey, it's because of our weakness. It's because of the mixed signals. So I know the actors who did this. Paul Wolfowitz was too much of an absent-minded professor type to realize that he could not send Bill Ludi to negotiate the entry into Iraq. He needed to go himself. What did that signal to the Turks? We know what that signaled to the Turks. It signaled that America wasn't serious. And then, so we insulted them by sending, Bill, who was a really low-level, relative functionary. And, in retrospect, it's completely obvious that they would snub us. So we screwed up. We didn't show them that we were serious, and we didn't show them that we knew what we were doing. So, so there was this, and time and again, Jeffrey, another mentor of mine is Richard Pearl, who's had a lot of dealings with the Turks. The Turks really respond to strength. They see our extending a hand, in friendship and trying to respect them as weakness, and they have no respect for that. They take advantage of us.
Yeah, but hang on, Adam, because you've just said there, no, we show disrespect by sending a sort of second ranker to do the negotiation when Wolfowitz himself should have gone. This is actually showing disrespect from their point of view. You see, if you look at them, there they are, a former, as you rightly say, imperial power, 90 million people, size of Egypt, but double the GDP of Egypt. The most populous and important power in the region, the largest army in the Middle East, the largest defense forces, straddling the oil and gas routes from the Caspian to Europe and to the Mediterranean, sitting with neighbor, strategically there next to Iran, Russia, and Syria. I just put it the other way around, and I would say, okay, what if Turkey were to go sour? What if they were seriously to go sour? What if they were suddenly to say, well, all right, well, let's do a deal with Iran. Let's get into bed more with Russia. I mean, I know historically, we could argue about this, but, what if? And I think then we'd think, hey, hang on a minute, this is, and then we might put our fingers out and think, well, where did we go wrong? How do we get this thing back on course? So I don't want to overstate it, but on the other hand, I just think it's an important part of the whole jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, and it's it was a disrespect, but there was also a sense of American weakness. So the two sort of went hand in hand there. It's a good question, Jeffrey. I don't know. I often think I get upset at the way Turkey behaves. I dislike Erdogan greatly. I've often thought, why is it that they're still a member of NATO?
Actually, a very nice guy.
What would really happen if we expelled them from NATO? What would really happen if we isolated them more diplomatically? Okay, so they would turn to Iran. We know that they would turn to Russia, but then how would that feel? These are three proud, weak, wounded powers that are very high context, very, very proud. They have low opinions of each other. Yeah. And they don't want anyone to tell them what to do, including their new bedfellows. Sure, things could get much worse, but is this accommodationist approach long term when you play out that scenario, and we anticipate Turkey's response to our accommodation, which I think will be continued snubbing its nose and taking without giving. I don't know which is better.
Let me get Naro to jump in here, because I know Naro had something to add to this.
Yes, I have. I want to elaborate on two things, and also I have a question for Jeffrey after that. But going back to Adam's talk about the Abraham Accord, I think generally, yes, you are absolutely spot on that this can only be something very good in the Middle East, something very new, something very positive. And I won't be surprised if in the next few days or weeks, other countries in the Middle East follow suit, just like the U.A.E. and make deals with Israel, because we know that secretly so many countries, including the Saudi Arabia, people are talking to Israelis. They are coming together. So this accord opens doors for other forces and other countries in the Middle East and in North Africa as well to follow suit and make similar agreements. And like I said, depart from other old questions that was we couldn't solve it at all for the past 50, 60 years. But going back to Turkey, the thing is, the question I have for Jeffrey, the West always accuses Turkey of being a country that assisted ISIS fighters to congregate in Syria, to come together in Syria and to become dominant force in Syria and Iraq and in other places. Turkey also has been accused of detaining journalists inside Turkey, which is correct. This is not, I don't think this is a European fault or American fault. Turkey has been accused of detaining political members of opposition parties, legitimate political parties, and some MPs, Turkey has been accused the way it deals with the minorities. And also Erdogan is making agreement with the MHP, which is a very ultra-nationalist racist party in Turkey, who believes that only Turkish blood is true blood and clean blood, for example. But also, what if Turkey went sour, like you said? Don't you think that Turkey is very sour at the moment? And Turkey is the country that doesn't want to deal. I don't know. I don't have the answer. I'm asking. Yeah. Don't you think that Turkey is not willing to make agreements with the West? The other thing that I want to, this is a question, that was a question. The other thing that I want to elaborate on is about the Iraq war, when Americans and European forces came to liberate Iraq in 2003. Turkey was asked to join, but Turkish parliament refused to join the forces. But thank God they didn't, because if Turks came here, it would have been a very bad situation. It would have been a different story right now. Because remember, these people in the Middle East generally, not just Iraq, but also other parts of the Middle East, they still have this bitter memory of the Ottoman Empire, and they see the current Turkish state as an extension of the Ottoman Empire. One day, one Arab intellectual wrote an article, and he said, when Ottomans came over to the Middle East and to the Arab countries, Arabs were intellectual people. They had philosophers, they had musicians, they had scientific labs, everything. But after 500 years, when the Ottomans left, most Arabs were illiterate. So this is what they have. This is the image that they have. And imagine with the American and European forces to have Turkish forces inside Iraq, while Turkey is claiming some parts of Iraq are still part of Turkey. So what would have happened, for example? Yeah. This is my take. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I hear what you say, and I'm very well aware of the charge sheet against Turkey. Whether they'd be found guilty on all counts, I doubt, quite honestly. But some counts they certainly would be. All that is true. It comes back to the fundamental point, though. What sort of relationship what do we want to happen to our relationship with Turkey in the future? That's the fundamental point. So in spite of all these things, and if we want to see, this old business of the glass is half full or half empty, if we want to see it as half empty all the time, then of course we're not going to make any progress in this. And I think if we see it as half full, then maybe we have a chance of making greater progress. I would also make the point that rather like a lot of people when they look at our relationship with the United States today, and they see it very much personified in terms of the relationship with whether or not they like Trump. A lot of these relationships go beyond the individual who's in power at the particular moment. And I have no doubt that Erdogan himself has a particular view of the position of Turkey. Some would say that he harks back to the Ottoman period. Some would say he'd like to be the new caliph. All sorts of things. That's as may be. Certainly, he appeals to that conservative base, Anatolian base, very strongly there. So, but I think what I would say is that our relationship with Turkey goes beyond Erdogan. And it is not true to say that it's a sort of monolithic state, because if we look even at the last elections, a number of parties opposed to Erdogan did extremely well. And in fact, the electorate was more or less 50-50. Erdogan managed to hang on to power. Even Istanbul, he lost. So, I would try to separate Erdogan and Turkey and look at our relationship with Turkey. But obviously taking account of the fact that it's going to be under the leadership of Erdogan for some time to come. As far as, well, I mean, we can rerun the whole Iraq conflict, in positions we took at the time, and hindsight, knowing what we know now, and all the rest of it. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for Kurdish people. There was a very interesting period, even under Erdogan, in fact, particularly under early phase one Erdogan, where he made very strong overtures to the Kurds and tried to win over the Kurds and, of course, legitimize the use of the Kurdish language and so on. And then for various reasons that fell apart. But so he wasn't, if you like, inimically opposed to the Kurds as such. He tried to make an accommodation at one stage. So, I just come back to the point, okay, fine, but what do we want to happen in terms of our relationship? And I think we've got to be very careful. Turkey is too important a country to dismiss. That's really what I'm saying.
So let me ask, Nara, I want to ask you a question. Let us assume that we are all half full kinds of people, glass half full kinds of people. Let us assume that we're optimists here, which I believe, generally speaking, we all are. Along your line of thinking, do you believe that it is possible for Kurds and your neighbors and your Arab neighbors to get past the issues with Turkey that you describe? Or is this something that you don't believe? Hey, Jeffrey, great idea, but I don't think it's going to happen. If that is the case, well, 6 months ago, we said the same thing about Israel, that none of these people would, I mean, maybe individuals, but not, on a large scale, would ever come to grips with Israel, but yet it's happened. So what would you say to that?
Yes, I think going back to Jeffrey's point, I think Turkish role in the Middle East is indispensable, and it's too big a country to ignore, and you cannot ignore Turkey at all. But the thing is, it's now sometimes we see that current Turkish government, current Turkey, it's a different Turkey from 20 years ago. Turkey is very much entangled with so many, problematic issues in the Middle East, whether it's Syria, whether it's northern Iraq, whether the Balkans, whether it's Libya even, and also Sudan and Israel and Saudi Arabia. So all of these problems, when you add them into equation, you see that Turkey is too much entangled themselves with the current problems that you cannot, see that Turkey can go back to the same Turkey 20 years ago. I also agree that, to have peace with Turkey, it's better to have a better relationship with Turkey. Because like Jeffrey said, 10, 15 years ago, when the peace agreement between Turkey and the PKK, and the Turkish political party, Kurdish political parties in Turkey was happening, it was the best time for this part of the Middle East. It was good for Kurds in Iraq. It was good for Arabs in Iraq. It was good for Syria. It was good for the whole of Turkey. But now we see that, nationalists and ultra-nationalists are hijacking power in Turkey. And this is leading to something very difficult to deal with in the near future. That's my fear. To come back to the question, I believe that having a good relation with Turkey, it's good. But whether I'm optimistic or pessimistic about the future of this relationship with Turkey, I'm very pessimistic. I can't see that Turkey going back to this peaceful place like 10, 15 years ago, for example.
I wanted to end off this discussion, I would say lighter, on a lighter note, with a lighter question, but I can tell you that the answer is far from light. I'm going to end off this conversation, and I want to get a response from each of you. A purely political question here. How much of this, well, let's go back. When candidate Obama was running for president, he had to choose a running mate. He was a young man who had very little foreign policy experience, and he chose Joe Biden as his running mate to balance that foreign policy experience. Now, we're going to leave humorous political banter aside for a moment, and we're going to fast forward to today. I'm curious to know what the general thought is about a President Biden and the foreign policy. I will tell you, if you take a look at some tweets, for example, a tweet that candidate Biden made about President Sisi of Egypt being President Trump's favorite dictator is something that is very worrisome to the country of Egypt, as well as he's made comments like that elsewhere also. And as we know, that President Biden would do everything in his power to keep the Iran deal as we know it. The question I have is, from your perspectives, looking out, or Ehud and Naro from looking in, I guess, from your perspectives, is it possible that the reason why this has happened now, the reason why so many other neighboring countries or regional countries have indicated that they would be interested in pursuing talks, is it possible that it's just that they are concerned about a Biden administration with regards to the Middle East? Ehud, I'm going to begin with you.
Well, I think if Biden is president, probably try to restore somehow the Iran deal, and the Arab states will adjust accordingly. They just always do. They will just try to do that. If Trump continues to be president, then he will continue with the maximum pressure on Iran and try to push them to a deal that it's better for the Israel and the United States. So that's more or less.
Is it so? Do you believe that it's possible? I mean, this is we're all speculating here.
Yeah.
But is it possible that the U.A.E, Sudan, who's now talking about it, possibly Oman and elsewhere, that are saying, you know what, maybe now is the right time because we don't know what the future holds?
Well, they try to kind of, for them, I don't think that matter in this sense of them renewing the kind of the ties with Israel now, but I think it's for them, it doesn't matter to them that much. They just want someone to back them up against the Iranians. They like Trump better in that sense, but if Biden is elected, they will try to adjust to it. It just, they go with the flow. Okay,
thank you, Ehud. Naro, are your neighbors just circling the wagons, or is this something that this has been in the works for so many years? It just so happens that now is the right time for it to happen. What say you?
I'll come back to Iran question and Biden, but before then, Biden's understanding of the problems in the Middle East, particularly Iraq, I think is and it was spot on, because prior to the Iraq war, he published an article in the New York Times, but also in the UK in the Guardian, who advocated that a united Iraq is not going to work, and it didn't. But when he was vice president, did he do anything about that? I didn't see any positive thing from him coming to solve the Iraqi problem when he was vice president, when he had power. But Biden is someone who has been coming to Iraq for the past 35 years. I think he understands Iraq a lot, but whether he can deliver anything, I don't know. Regarding the Iranian deal, I think there will be some negotiation with Iranians. If he was elected as president, then they will negotiate with the Iranians. But I don't believe that even the Democrats, even the far left Democrats will go back to the same deal, the JCPOA deal like before. Because one of the good things Trump did and this administration did was ripping apart this deal, because the deal was lacking so many important issues. The deal had so many holes and unsolved problems. So even I think if he's elected as the president, he will negotiate with the Iranians, but I don't think he will agree with the same old deal with Iran at all. There will be some kind of agreements with Iran if he's president, but not the same one like the JCPOA. Okay.
Excellent. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my concern about a Biden presidency would be he'd be far more sympathetic to the European Union. Therefore, he'd be inclined to go along with a lot of their sort of foreign policy wishes, if you like, and therefore JCPOA comes back on the table. And I agree with what Nara's just said, that it wouldn't be precisely the same JCPOA. But don't forget, the other signatories have also said they recognize there need to be changes in that. So I think there'd be a great effort to accommodate a new JCPOA, but with some necessary modifications. I think Biden might be less sympathetic naturally to the United Kingdom. You know, his whole sort of roots are different, and yeah, he's an Irish Catholic origin, and you know, Trump feels a bit more related to the United Kingdom, I think. So yeah, that would be my concern. I mean, after all, every new administration has an opportunity for a reset, and nothing's perfect at the moment. Let's just see, even Trump Mark II, maybe that we could have a reset there. But I think everyone wants to feel they can sleep safely in their beds at night, and that someone isn't going to suddenly get us all into deep trouble. So yeah, we shall see. But I'm interested in your opening gambit there. Yeah, Eli.
It'll be interesting to see. Is a yes or no question? Is a Biden presidency good for a European army or not?
Well, the trouble is that DC characteristically has been very vulnerable to advice that it gets from certain European capitals. And for a long time, they were told, "Oh no, this is the answer to the burden sharing problem. This is the Europeans wanting to do more, and now you should welcome this." And he was told, even by Blair and people, this is something that should be. These are things that should be welcomed. I mean, this is nonsense, of course. The whole point of the EU Army initiative is not to produce a more capable ally for the United States. It's actually to create an autonomous actor that will carry out entirely different functions, mainly follow French foreign policy objectives. So, no, they'd be foolish to go down that route, but I wouldn't put it past them.
Excellent. I hear that. Adam, your thoughts on this?
Yes, I really like your thinking. It does make sense that the U.A.E., fearing a Biden presidency, would want to sort of lock in some anti-Iranian gains. What I can tell you, though, is at the very beginning of the Trump administration, we did work hard with the Sunnis to generate precisely what has materialized with the U.A.E. So I have a little bit of inside knowledge in that regard, and it may just be coincidental that with a fear of a resurrected JCPOA that this puts some facts on the ground. I agree with my colleagues. I don't think that I think that JCPOA was truly a very, very radical initiative that was premised on shifting faulty assumptions, namely that there was something beneficial about having an Iran that would balance the Israelis, would balance the Sunni. I just think that this is nonsensical, and my sense is that this emerged from this became a pet project of Obama and Kerry, but my sense is that Biden was somewhat wary of it and never genuinely bought onto it. That said, I've encountered people fairly recently in the past few months who have met with Biden, and what all of them say is that his mind is going. This man is an old man. He is, and he's an old man. I mean, there can be men who are old, but who still have their faculties. He is old in his faculties. So we don't know. We don't know what he's going to be like. People change. People do change. Jeffrey, you're laughing. You're a man with a very.
I know. I'm really laughing. It's a sort of sardonic laughter in a way, because I'm quite fearful. We need a good, strong leader in the White House, and someone who knows what he's doing, and someone with something between his ears.
Well, the worst case scenario would ultimately be a Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi administration.
Yeah, and it's truly, I mean, the White House is a place where a president really has to watch what's going on. If a president is losing his mind, his that office attracts such power-hungry people that you will get all sorts of erratic behavior. And we've had somewhat of a problem like that with Trump. I think Trump's faculties are quite strong. It's just that his interests in exercising all these levers of power at his disposal is limited, and he doesn't have much training in it. He hasn't thought about it for decades, like all these other people that assume that office. So, he had a very, very steep learning curve, and he's learned some, but he hasn't learned as fast as I think all of us would have liked him to have learned. But it's once the president no longer has a grip on what's happening, all sorts of mischief can happen, and that's quite troubling.
Well, I thank you, Adam, for those final thoughts. I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I think this was a fantastic conversation. Something that I believe that we should be doing this periodically as we see things happen, as this relationship grows and naturally builds. We should maybe have a few more of these conversations. But I want to thank you, Ehud, for joining us as well. Ehud Ilam, Naro Zagros, Dirk Yarneffing, Adam Levinger, Jeffrey Van Harden, all Gold Institute distinguished and senior fellows who've taken the time to have this conversation with me from the Gulf to the Middle East. I take a look at the U.A.E. Israel new relationship. I want to encourage everybody to take a look at the Gold Institute website to find the writings of our fellows. You can look at that at goldiis.org. Jeffrey referred to a piece that he wrote about this, in particular about Turkey. And that will be going up about the same time that this video goes up as well. And I encourage everybody to review that. With that, I want to thank you once again for joining me today, and I wish you all well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All the best.